Kristy Cambron is a vintage-inspired storyteller writing from the space where art, history, and faith intersect. She is a Christy Award-winning author of historical fiction and nonfiction. Her most recent book, The Italian Ballerina, was published in July of this year. A self-proclaimed history nerd, she loves to chase all things research. She holds a degree in art history and research writing and spent 15 years working for a Fortune 100 corporation before stepping away to the exciting world of storytelling. Kristy lives in Indiana with her family, where she can be found writing books in her favorite coffee shop. Kristy, welcome to Jacksonville.
Hello, thank you everyone. I'm so excited to be here.
And I will also do a quick intro for our wonderful interviewer, Madeline Martin. She is a New York Times and international bestselling author of historical fiction and historical romance. Her most recent book, The Librarian Spy, was published in July. July must have been a very exciting time for fans of historical fiction. So she is a diehard history lover who loves research. She lives here in beautiful Northeast Florida with her family. And when she's not writing or researching or momming or all the many things she does, you can find her spending time with her family at Disney or eating Nutella while laughing over some cat videos. She also loves to travel, attributing her fascination in history with having spent most of her childhood as an army brat in Germany. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Madeline, I'll leave the rest to you.
Thank you so much for those wonderful introductions. We really do appreciate it. And thank you so much, Kristy, for joining us here in Jacksonville today. This is so exciting. And I'm glad that the weather didn't cancel anything. I know this last week was a little hairy, and I hope that everybody stayed safe and everything during the storm.
Yeah, definitely. We had family in Florida. I've done research for novels in Florida, and the people there are just so warm and welcoming. And even from Indiana, it was something that was just so heavy on our hearts, checking in with people, saying, what can we do, and making sure everyone's okay. So for everyone who is here, we hope you're safe, and we are so glad that you're here today.
Mm-hmm. So I have to say, I love during our intros that we both are obviously huge history nerds and we love our research. So I'm just going to go on ahead and dig in. I did notice that you said that, so during the pandemic, I mean, writing during the pandemic was difficult anyways, but for people who love to travel to do their research, it is even more difficult. So you wrote not only, and by the way, all of your covers are just gorgeous. I just have to say that they're absolutely stunning. But you did write the Paris Dressmaker and also the Italian Ballerina during the pandemic, which obviously, really you weren't able to travel. So how did you kind of work around that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is the one that you just mentioned, the Paris Dressmaker. So this one is set during World War II in Paris. And yes, as you said, sometimes something happens where we can't travel as authors. And to do our research, honestly, I love the writing, but my favorite part is the research. As you said, I am such a research and a history nerd, and I love talking to people. And so you get that together, and I kind of have the perfect job because I can go out and I can ask people, I can ask experts. I love going to museums. I love going to universities and speaking with history professors or language professors and connecting sometimes with people who do the real jobs that my characters would do. But as you said, during the pandemic, everything shut down. And so as a writer, the things that we would love to do, usually that research for me starts with reading. It starts in the library. It starts going and doing the hard work, turning the pages and finding out a little bit more about history and who these characters are, so then you can fully develop them. So some resources that really worked for me, and you can kind of see behind me, I'm going to give everyone a look. You can kind of see behind me, I have color-coded bookshelves because I was an art student. And so I have a home library where I, for years, have tried to invest in my own books. And so go to the libraries and find the books that work for me. And if I have a book that I just really loved, I'm like, I'm going to buy an extra copy for my shelf. And so I have a lot of art history and history books and volumes and things. And so my research really starts there. But during the pandemic, one of the things that just worked for me was YouTube. And so actually reviewing videos, I mean, one of the things that was just remarkable was watching YouTube videos of the liberation of Paris at the end of World War II and just watching that live footage, it just made that story just come alive so much. And then also, one of the things that I really enjoyed doing, especially for the Italian ballerina, I hadn't been someone who's been to a lot of ballets. And so during the pandemic, I would have my popcorn, I would have my coffee, and I'm sitting in front of my laptop, like literally just eating popcorn and watching these beautiful ballets, and just with my notebook and just jotting down the different ballet steps and things so that I could make sure that the research was really airtight. So if I have the opportunity to speak to someone about research, I'll absolutely do it. You know, like I said, going to those places, the libraries, the museums, the historical sites, or traveling overseas. But if you can't do that, then it's like taking 100% of the things that you have, the resources that you have, and using those well. So that's what we tried to do during the pandemic. But I did have an appointment to go do patisserie, and I had to cancel that because of the pandemic. And I was so upset because I wanted to go learn how to make some of the French patisserie, and it was like, it didn't work. So
oh, what an amazing experience that would have been. Well, you know, you just have to table that, and like now you just have to write another book set in Paris, right?
Yeah, I can totally do another one. Most of my novels have Paris in there somewhere. I've kind of had this little love affair with Paris since my art history college days. And so it's funny, almost every one of my novels has Paris in there somewhere, or a scene in Paris. I always manage to work it out.
Oh, that's perfect. So you'll definitely be able to find some other excuse to have to go to Paris for more research and get that patisserie training.
I mean,
I love that.
Yeah, I'll sacrifice for the next book if I have to.
Yeah, I mean, we do what we must, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things that I really love about your books as well, obviously, like with both of us loving history so much, is how you do inspire them on true events. Like, so for example, I know that with the Italian ballerina, you had the syndrome K sickness, and with the Paris dressmaker, those real testimonies that women had published or that they had given about their time actually working in the fashion industry during World War II. So if you can kind of elaborate a little bit on that, I thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah, I love that question because it is something that I try to do in all of my novels. I want to try to give a voice to those who may have been voiceless. And in this case, and talking about the Paris dressmaker, it started out to be things that I am interested in history, in World War II, in fine art, and Paris and France. And I really found that through the research process, and this always happens, the story, and I know you'll get this, Madeline, the story and the characters took me deeper than I imagined. And so where it started out at this beautiful party, this exclusive party where Coco Chanel and Vogue and, you know, Wallace Simpson. And so you got the who's who names of 1939 Paris and the fashion world, and they all come together for this exclusive party on the grounds of Versailles. And it's almost like I could imagine that party happening before the world would slip into the disaster of war. And then all of a sudden, I'm starting out in the Paris fashion houses and the runways and this haute couture kind of world. And then all of a sudden, I begin doing the research, and it was the women like us. It was the everyday women who were making the tough decisions and the choices, and they didn't have survival that was assured. And so it's wanting to give voices to them and historical figures who in some ways, like the movie Monuments Men, if anyone out there has seen that fantastic movie, but the character that Cate Blanchett played was actually a real figure in history. And it was kind of like she was a bit sidelined, Rose Valland. And so she was incredibly brave, and she was an incredibly just a survival character, but she was so brilliant, and she was able to catalog all of the art that the Nazis were stealing. And so you try to find this balance between who are these real characters and who are these real people that lived in history, and like I said, try to give them a voice. And so it started out with the Chanel dresses. And then one of my favorite scenes in the novel, towards the end, there is a character who's wearing an armband of the French resistance. And she had been in the fashion world, and she touches the emblem of this armband, and tears rolling from her eyes. And she says, I think this is the most beautiful thing I've ever worn. And so that for me was the journey of the characters from kind of the bookend of occupation to the bookend of liberation. And we had that throughout the story. The same with the Italian ballerina. I mean, there were real people in history who invented this disease, all to fool the Nazis so that they could save those Italian Jews who were fleeing the Holocaust. And it worked. I mean, it was just a brilliant ruse, but you have these characters that maybe they've been lost to history. And so we wanted to try to give a voice to them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And especially, the Nazis were very, very, very like germaphobe. They were always so worried about like catching anything. So if anybody had any kind of sickness, it really was a great way to shelter them. And you did such a good job really illustrating that in the Italian ballerina.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, like, how do you end up doing research for your characters well, obviously, I mean, you kind of touched on that a little bit, but as far as like their personalities go, have you really found like one particular person in history that really did inspire, or was it sort of like, a series of different people that you sort of read through and you sort of put them into one character? How does that usually end up working?
Oh, I love that question too, because as writers, we very often write from life. And so while I don't sit around with my family and friends and say, oh, that person's the villain in the next novel, I don't do that, right? Like,
wouldn't it be great if it was that easy though?
Right? Yeah, I don't do that. However, it's funny, I always say that like my husband is every hero that I write,
Aww.
so there are aspects of people around me, family, friends, sometimes people that I meet that find their ways to be layered into a character. And while I may not necessarily give them like their actual name, sometimes they do find themselves in the characters. However, I do sometimes when I meet people who are just fascinating, sometimes I will say, can I make you a character in the book? And they'll kind of look at me like, are you serious? And I'll be like, yes. I once met this amazing barista at an airport Starbucks, and her name was Stormy, and she became a character in the book. And I said, can I use your name?
Oh,
brilliant. And she said yes. And so I've done that before. There were actually two characters. There was another one, the Nigel character. I love, one of my secret loves is to go to the international foods aisle of the grocery and to just look at all of the different international foods. I mean, I think it goes back to my days of art history, learning about different cultures, and it's just fascinating to me. And I met a gentleman there who was actually from England, and we stood there and talked for about 45 minutes. And it was the coolest thing because he said, well, I love books. I'm on the way to the library. And he pulled out this note that had all of the books that he had wanted to get. And it like literally unrolled in front of me. And he said, I'm on the way to the library to get all of these books. Only he said it with a brilliant British accent. It sounded fantastic. And I said, sir, his name was Mr. Duckworth. And I said, can I please make you a character in the book? And he said, well, of course. And I'm sure he said it, cheers, of course you may, that kind of thing. But I do that often. So characters, from life kind of find their way layered into the characters in the book. And then sometimes, example here, the Italian ballerina, I'm not super graceful, friends. I'm just not. And so sometimes I want to write characters who are everything that I wish that I could be. So the characters in the Paris Dressmaker or in the Italian ballerina, they were so brave. I mean, I just couldn't believe some of the choices that they had and that they were so brave. And so sometimes I'm trying to work out in my own mind, if I was in that situation, this is what I would hope I would be able to do. And I'm not even sure I could be as strong as they were or as graceful. So of course, who doesn't want to be graceful like a prima ballerina when you're not? So it's fun to develop those characters and to find out who they are.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Even just as a reader, it's so fun to read about characters who, I never really could be in real life. So
Right.
I love so much that you do enjoy writing about the characters like that. So, with so much that, because I know that we dig deep and a lot of our research is like all the nonfiction books we pour through. What is something that you've read about in history that has like really genuinely surprised you? Because I know we get inundated with so much, but every now and then you find like that one thing that's like, wow.
Yeah, well, in no way trying to make a comparison to what we went through in the pandemic with World War II, not making that comparison, but in doing the research and finding out how dramatic everything was with the occupation when the Nazi regime came in and the people were trying to escape, and just the absolute loss of life, the absolute terror, the absolute just day and night difference from when they came in to occupy. And you would read things about the long queuing just to get bread or just to get food, or how the salons all had to shut down. They weren't able to stay open. And so that was when you started to get like fashion trends, like you started to get the turbans, mainly because women could not go and get their hair colored. And so they started wearing turbans and things like that. And how that was for us in the pandemic when so many things changed because so many basic services were closed down. And so again, not making the comparison, but there were some things that were similar. And then finding in the Paris Dressmaker in particular, again, what started out as, oh, fashion houses, and this is glitz and glamour and haute couture of Paris. And then it transitioned to women who were defying the Nazis just with what they wore. And they would wear belts with music notes, or they would wear hats with ribbon that had music notes of the French resistance songs on them. And they would parade right in front of those Nazi soldiers. And the soldiers would have no idea what was on them, but it was almost like a, turning up your nose to your occupiers, and women, everyday women who were doing what they could do to defy the Nazis. And that to me was just brilliant. And again, just the bravery and the defiance of those women, it just was incredible. Or hearing stories about how wedge sandals, if anyone has any like cork wedge sandals, those actually came out of World War II because there were so many services that you couldn't get, and cork was one of those things that was not rationed. And so you could have cork as a sole of your shoe, and it would be really thick, and then it would wear down over the couple of years before you could go to the cobbler and get your shoes fixed. And again, long queuing lines just to get your shoes fixed. Or how there would be dogs like poodles that would be shaved, and then they would braid and weave the hair into sweaters and things like that. I mean, just remarkable research with the fashion that I just had no idea. It gives you so much respect for those past generations.
Absolutely. And, I really think a lot of the reason why people love World War II historical fiction is because those sort of workarounds when you're dealing with something where you are so deprived of everything that you're used to in your normal everyday life, having those little touches and learning I guess it's just the workarounds for everyday life that everyday people had to deal with. It really is so incredibly fascinating. That and also, like you said, the bravery. I know it's so easy to think, oh, I would completely sacrifice everything to do the right thing and to save people. But when you think about the fact that your children could literally be killed if you were helping, I mean, it is a tough decision to make, and it would be great to think I would totally make that decision in that situation, but it's very difficult. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you definitely hit the nail on the head with that. So I know that something that a lot of readers love to hear about is the writing process. So how does it work for you? Do you research a lot first? Do you write a lot after? Do you do both at the same time? How does that work out for you?
So this question is really fun because I'm usually excited to answer, but a little terrified at the same time, because if there are any aspiring writers, because we're all readers, right? We love story, but there may also be some writers out there, and I don't want to scare anyone off from becoming a writer if that's on your heart. So when you hear my writing process, please don't let that be a deterrent if this is something that you are interested in. So my writing, I love to write novels that are non-linear, mostly because that is how I think. I'm so character driven, so character focused. One of the things about me that most people don't know is that I absolutely love spoilers. Love them. Any book, any movie, any TV show, the new Star Wars movies when they came out, give me all the spoilers. I want to know everything that's happening. Why? Because if I know where a story is going, I don't want to rob the storyteller from the joy of telling that story, but if I know where it's going, then I can focus on what is interesting to me are those little minute ticks and turns in a character's motivation, and you can see that across the path. And so for me, my novels are written very out of sequence. It is funny though, for every novel, I know the opening scene and the ending scene before I begin. And for me, and in our family, we call this the literary sandwich. So I literally have the opening scene, which is the bread, the ending scene, which is the bread. And then I have to figure out how to get the characters from bread to bread and what goes in the middle. And so sometimes I will write that opening scene first, then I will write the end scene in the novel, then I may write chapter 12, then I may write chapter 25. Most of the time it is just seeing the scenes like a movie reel in my head. I will get the scenes down when they come to me. And then I have brilliant editors who come in, and it's always like, clean up in aisle 6, friend. My editors will come together and they will help me make sure that the timeline works. And that's really how the novel comes together. But yeah, in one series that I wrote, the Lost Castle series, 3 books, I knew the opening scene of the first book and I knew the ending scene of the last book. And that was 3 novels. So that was a triple-decker literary sandwich on that one.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I confess I'm a super like type A plotter and I do like in totally chronological order. So that gave me a little bit of heart palpitations.
I know, it
but
does.
also I imagine that it's so much easier to write. It's not easier to write. Sorry, I don't mean it like that. But I'm sure that it's nice when you get stuck. You can just be like, I'm going to move on to chapter 12 and I'll come back to 9 later. Because I know I'll sit there and just bang my head against the keyboard on chapter 9, waiting until I get to chapter 12 when it comes up in the queue, you know?
Yeah. It's really fun too to write, think about romance, think about, you've got writer's block and like you said, you're just beating your head against the keyboard. And I will say, just move on to that really amazing scene where the guy and their girl find each other after everything they've been through and they come together. I'm gonna go write that today. And that usually boosts me right up. And then I'll come back and write the other stuff, the harder stuff later.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. I love that. So how does your research process work? Are you researching it then like while you're writing it? Or do you do like some research beforehand? How long does it also take you to write a book? Not to scare anybody,
Yeah.
like you were saying. I know historical fiction does take a lot longer to write than most genres. So
yeah, absolutely. And again, we've already said that research is one of our favorite things. So I am most of my novels are set in Europe, not all of them, but most of them are set in Europe. And so I will do a lot of research that is based in England or based in France or based in Italy. If I can't travel there, it's all about watching films, reading books. One thing with my first novel, you're asking how long it takes to write books. This is my debut novel, The Butterfly and the Violin. I actually wrote this one while I was on maternity leave with our 3rd son, because I was working in corporate America. I was working so many hours. And I remember telling my agent at the time, I've got this book that's on my heart about the art of Auschwitz, about the women's orchestra of Auschwitz, and I really want to write this. And so I said, I only have 8 weeks while I'm on maternity leave. And so the funny story is I actually wrote that novel on my iPhone in the middle of the night, most nights when I had our newborn, and I would just kind of hook him with the bottle in here in this hand, and I would just type chapters on my phone. And that novel came out on the phone in about 8 weeks. And that does not usually happen. I'd already done the research in my undergrad work. And so it was kind of like dusting off a corner of the attic in your mind, so to speak. And so the research was really there. I had to go back and I had to look at timelines. I had to look at things like maps of the camps in Auschwitz. Had the amazing opportunity to interview an Auschwitz-Birkenau survivor. And so I'd already done the research. So by the time I was able to speak with her, I was able to ask more sensory perception questions. Like, did you know what day of the week it was? Did you see flowers or plants? Did you see animals in the camps? Did you hear the music? Do you remember hearing the music? And so things like that came later. That part of the research, I'd already done the basic research, and then that part, that more sensory perception type research, came a little bit later. For me, doing the research is all along. I mean, it's almost like I can't be in a paragraph and all of a sudden, if I didn't know what the weather was on that day in London in 1940, pause, go Google, go look up the resources that I have for either, weather in London. I try to be so historically accurate to a fault. Funny story with the Italian ballerina. We had one aspect where I had a character right at the start of the Blitz. She's walking down a street in Piccadilly, and I wanted to make sure every business that she was walking by actually was there. And so I went on this rabbit trail of research. What businesses were there during the Blitz? And there was one that was Frank's Hairdressing Saloons, Saloons. And then I went back and forth with my editors. We were like, oh, what do we do? Saloons is historically correct, but salons is what people know because it was a hair salon. And so what do? We opted to be historically accurate, knowing that people were going to come back and say, is this a typo? And say, no, we wanted to be historically accurate. So yeah, most of the time I cannot move past a paragraph that I'm writing. If there is like a research hole, I've got to go find the answer. And I absolutely love that part of the process.
That's awesome. So I have to know, did you end up getting any emails from readers telling you that you misspelled it?
I did.
I figured.
Because here's the thing I love. Readers are so smart. My editor's telling me that all the time. Your readers are so smart.
Yes.
And I guarantee you there's going to be someone, or maybe I would actually have a mistake somewhere in the book, or, something that maybe I could have polished up that research a little better. That's why we have proofreaders ahead of time. And, so consulted with people who had some dance background and ballet background and things, just to make sure that I was correct. And we did catch a few things, again, because our readers are so smart and sometimes they're experts in the things that we are not. And I love that we can depend on the readers. But yeah, I mean, it was a couple of emails and a couple of notes on social media. And I was like, I knew it. Y'all are so smart. You got that.
That's great. I love it. All right. So let's see here. Oh, so what book was the most difficult for you to write and why?
Oh, you know what? I would have to say it was The Italian Ballerina, but here's the thing. This one, for some reason, the book just didn't come together on my timeline. It was almost like the book was an entity of its own. And I'm thinking for The Italian Ballerina, that was because it was during the pandemic, and it just felt like everyone was going through so much, and it made it a little bit more difficult to be creative. Though we had the time, though our family had time during lockdown and things where I could literally sit and read and research and write, for me, just getting those words out on the page and being creative during such a difficult time for the world, it just seemed like so many people were suffering, so many people were going through so much, that it just kind of stunted the creativity a little bit. And so for me, that novel did not come as quickly as I wanted. I mean, I think we were hovering around 16, 18 more weeks for that novel to come together. And each novel is its own gift, if you will. So you don't know how long that novel is going to take to pull together. And really, when I'm asked that question, I don't often know how long the novel took, because sometimes it can be brewing in the back of your mind. I know you get this, Madeline, for months, for years. The idea for Syndrome K and The Italian Ballerina, that was actually something that a reader sent me an article years ago. And I loved the thought, this little niche idea of history that I knew nothing about and I wanted to learn more about. And then just to pull that out, years later and say, okay, now's the time. I'm going to write that book. So, I mean, there's quite a difference between writing a book in 8 weeks on your iPhone. I don't even know how that happened. And then trying to write a novel during the pandemic. I mean, it's just so different, to even compare the novels, and the writing process was just so different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and also, so, kind of on that thread, when you do find that you're having difficulty writing, in case we do have any aspiring authors or authors as well, on right now, what do you do to kind of help push yourself out of that writing slump?
Well, there's a writing friend that I have. She writes historical fiction. Her name is Sarah Ladd. I'm good friends. And please if you all are writers, have some cheerleaders, have some dream defenders who will come alongside you, who know the same thing, who do the same thing, who write as you do. And my friends, Catherine Ray and Sarah Ladd, are great friends for that. They both write historical fiction. But one of the things that Sarah told me years ago that worked for her, and I tried it, and it so worked for me, was when I was blocked. She said, instead of trying to write an entire scene, instead of trying to get that scene, she said, just start with dialogue. Just start getting the dialogue between two characters. That will fire up that scene. And then you can go and add some descriptives. You can go add part of the plot in later, but the dialogue very often is something that will just spark and get that scene moving. Sometimes for me, even if I am on deadline and that date can be circled on the calendar and you're staring at it and thinking, oh, I've got to get word count down. Sometimes I will literally close the laptop, walk away, go take a walk, go get out in nature, go do something different, like go do something that doesn't take my brain power. Maybe it's doing housework. Maybe for me, one of the things I love to do is chop vegetables, because it's just using my hands, and then it kind of gives me a brain break, and then I can come back when I'm fresh. And you'll find that you actually have a better time writing than if you try to push through. Sometimes you do need to just give yourself a break and step away. So those things have worked for me in the past.
Yeah, I like that. That's perfect. So, I think I already know the answer to this one, but what is the easiest book that you have ever written? And I'm sure it's the one that you tapped out on your phone in like 2 months, which is just amazing to me.
Right. Well, I was going to say that one, but I did want to talk about one that does have a Florida connection, and it's The Ringmaster's Wife. So this one, in some ways, was easiest because I was having so much fun, because I had the opportunity to go to the Ringling Museum and the Ringling there in Sarasota, Florida, to work with the Ringling family descendants and the Burton family descendants, to work with the curator there at the Kazan Mansion at the time, and to go behind the scenes and to really just dig in with the research. And just to be able to ask all the questions. I mean, to be able to go through that mansion and to envision what it was like in its heyday with the flapper parties in 1929. And I mean, just how incredible that experience was to do firsthand research, and is right here in our country, in the state of Florida. I mean, it was brilliant. And so I think because we try to take our kids on any research trips, you know, so it's kind of like a family affair. And one of my other novels that I wrote, Castle on the Rise, it's set in Dublin, Ireland, it's about the Easter Rising in 1916. And we were there almost exactly 100 years after those events took place in 2016. So those novels for me were probably the most fun because we were doing this firsthand research. Like we were just digging into those sites and everything. So I loved those connections and those research trips. So many good memories for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, research trips, they really are amazing. And even like when you're writing and you get to kind of pull in from trips that you've done and remember like the memories of like eating the food and seeing all the places. And yeah, it's very, very exciting. So is there one story that you've written that you feel like you connect with a little bit more, or yeah?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, you know, the interesting thing is the ones that you are writing at the time feel like you are, I know you'll get this too, Madeline, like you are so connected, and you may be writing that book and you'll think, this is more connected than I've ever been to any other story. And then you move on to the next one and you feel even more connected to that one. So I think it does have a little bit to do with the fact that we write characters, that we're tapping into all these different emotions. I know I can be a little bit of a dramatic writer myself, so I'm feeling all the feelings. I'm getting all the emotions. And so I can feel maybe more connected to a book like right when I'm in the thick of it. But the novel that's really special is The Butterfly and the Violin, because this was my debut novel, that one that I typed out on the phone, you know, when I was on maternity leave. But it's special for a couple of reasons, because that was the only novel that my dad got to be a part of. And we had 2 years of rejections on the road to publication. And so if there are any aspiring authors who are watching this either today or in the future, I want to encourage you that if you love reading, you love books, to keep going. Don't give up, because we went through 2 years of that, knowing that this was on my heart of what I wanted to do. And we finally got a yes with my publishing family at HarperCollins. We got that first yes from them, and we were just thrilled. And I remember all those years ago, an hour later, I got a call from my dad, and he said, this could be bad. I may have leukemia. And so we went on this journey of editing The Butterfly and the Violin at my local cancer center when my dad was going through his chemo infusions. And we had a gentle goodbye for now after 5 months. And so I got to dedicate the book to my dad, but he was not there at the launch party, and he was not able to be part of any of the other books. And so that book for me, for my own personal publication journey and my own reasons, that for our family in a very difficult and heartbreaking year, having that debut novel was actually a bright spot for us. And so so that novel is special for me for sentimental reasons. But as I said, every novel is almost like its own journey, and it owns a place in your heart from that point on.
That's really beautiful. I love that. And I have to say, I think with writing World War II, it's okay to write dramatic. I can't imagine it not being a dramatic time period for anybody to have experienced. And so now I'm sure everybody is dying to know, and I am as well. What are you working on next?
Big surprise, a World War II.
It's okay. We all love World War II, so keep it coming.
Yeah, so this will be a split time novel covering World War I and World War II in the same family. And I'm focusing on two things. One is the forgotten Blitz. So the Blitz areas that were in Scotland and England outside of London, specifically the Coventry Blitz, which at the time in November of 1940 was the largest civilian loss of life for England in the entire war. And on top of that, I'm also writing about the land girls. So the women who would come from London and they would go and they would work on the farms, because there were so many of the men who were off in different places serving in the armed forces. And so the women would go to these areas outside of the cities, and they would grow the food so that during the blockades and everything, so that England would not starve. And then unwittingly, they find themselves in the middle of a war zone when the Blitz happens in some of these outlying areas. And so I'm bringing those two things together. The main portion of the novel is a scene where we have in Coventry, we have warring bookshops. So we have two bookshops who are right across the street from each other. And these owners were friends. And we've got this, this lovers to enemies to lovers again trope that's going on in the novel. And they're owners of these warring bookshops. And then a real war comes. And how are they going to handle that? So again, I'm in England again. And I love that. One of my other novels, The Painted Castle, was in England, because it's really the soundtrack of my youth. My grandfather was a B-17 co-pilot who was stationed out of Framlingham and served in World War II. So those are the memories that I have. So England, you know, my own family's heritage is English and parts of other things. But yeah, so my own family's heritage is kind of coming out again in this novel, and just fascinating. The research is just incredible. And I've never written, I mean, I thought of you, Madeline, because I've never written anything in a library or in a bookshop. And it's so much fun to imagine those scenes in an English bookshop in 1940. So that's where I'm at right now.
I definitely have quite the affinity for bookshops and libraries.
You do, and stunning covers to go with it. So
yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm not gonna lie, when you said the warring bookshops, I was like, ooh, yes.
I know, right?
You know, I was already excited anyways, but I love books about books.
Right. And yes, I'm having so much fun researching all of the novels that came out in England during that time. And yeah, so it's been really, really cool to write that. And so that's what I'm working on right now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Absolutely looking forward to that one. So we are opening it up for questions now. If anybody has any questions, I am going to slide out my keyboard here so I can see the chat, and I will read those aloud. That way Christy will know what the question is and everybody else does, and then Christy can answer that too. So, and
I'm on Jeopardy. So I feel like we need the Jeopardy music in the background.
I know.
Great questions are coming through. I'm a little nervous. Where's my buzzer?
That and my cat has been kind of like wandering around here, although it looks like she's finally settled. Okay, so have you ever come across any readers who have taken any valuable lessons from your books?
Oh, one of the things that you love so much as an author is when the readers connect with you. And there's so many times that I have met with you, the readers, either on Zoom, on an opportunity like this, or in the libraries. I have an event later this month at another library in Indiana. I really love supporting the libraries and the bookshops. And in part, that's what you do. You support the libraries, you support the indie booksellers, you support authors so that we can keep telling these stories. And then here's one of the things that I've learned in the decade now that I've been in the publishing industry, is that anytime there is a gathering like this, anytime there is a book signing opportunity or whatever it is, it's not about me. It's not about my story. It's not about the book that I've written. It's always about the person who is sitting across from you or standing across from you. So many times I have been in a book signing line and I'm signing the book, and then the individual standing across from me is telling me their story. And so often I'm brought to tears, or they will say, this aspect of the story was similar to my family, or this gave me hope, or this was something that I learned, or this was a really beautiful moment. I had no idea this thing really happened in history. And as I said, so often I'm brought to tears, and it's part of what we do as writers. We're trying to focus on what happened in history, right? And that connects us into humanity. And so then when I'm at events like this, or I'm person to person with someone, it's that humanity in the flesh. That humanity becomes real. This isn't a character in a book. This is actually a real beating heart that's standing across from you. So for me, I would say so many times the readers connect, and sometimes you connect on social media, and that is just as valuable, you know, just having those messages of encouragement or hearing your stories. That's really me on Facebook. That's really me on Instagram. And so when you leave a comment and you say, this blessed me, or I've had people who I've talked about my dad's cancer journey, and then people who have come back and said, I had a cancer journey with my spouse or with a loved one or with a friend. And that just touches my heart to think that anything that is in a book that I've written would connect with you. I mean, that's almost like just a blessing back to me. And so I want to thank everyone, all of you who are here today and everyone who's out there. It really does mean a lot to authors when you connect with us to encourage us in what we write.
Absolutely. I feel like we put so much of our hearts into the book. It's nice to know that people feel that. So let's see here. Oh, and thank you, Emily, for that question too. And Kristen, When you ask a stranger if you can use them in your book and they say yes, do you need to follow up with written permission? That's a good question.
I haven't, because in the front of the book, there's always this disclaimer. We always have, the legal team who makes sure and prepares all of that. I thank the person in the back of the book. I let them know if this is okay. Can I thank you in the back of the book? And then at the front, it always says that, these are fictional characters and things like that. So I have not had to get any type of authorization to do that. But here's the thing, the characters were not like evil, awful characters. Like, I don't use someone's real name, like here's the villain and they're going to have that person's name. Like, that has never happened. One example would be, there was a gentleman who worked at my post office, and I was always in there sending books. And we just kind of would chat back and forth, and his name was CB. And I asked him one day, I said, what does CB stand for? And he said, Siebert Byron. And I said, that's a fantastic name. Can I use it in the book? And he said, yes. And then I would go back later and I would give him the progress, like, okay, here's the advanced reader copy. Okay, here's a copy of the book, take it home for you and your wife. So there was just a minor character that had the name, and I thanked him in the back of the book, but there wasn't anything that was, negative or derogatory. So no, I haven't had to get permission, but we always made sure that we give acknowledgement when we do that.
And total shout out to the legal teams at our publishers that allow us to write these books without having to worry about that.
Legal teams, the cover designers, like,
yes,
every time someone says,
and the editors,
yes,
and the readers, obviously.
The retail, the librarians, the booksellers.
Everything.
We love you all.
All of you.
We love you.
All right. So let's see here. From Pilot, have you always known that you wanted to be a writer, or did you just kind of hope that it would happen?
Oh, what a great question. I actually spoke at an elementary school on career day last week, and I got that exact same question, and I will give the same answer. No, I had no idea that I was going to be a writer. In fact, when I was a kid, my mom would take my sister and me to the library every week in summer, and my sister would run to the fiction section. She would read all the chapter books. I went the other way. I went to the art section, and I would pull down these thick volumes of art history and Disney animation. And when I was a kid, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a Disney animator. I loved visual storytelling. But here's the joke in our family, like, I've got these hands, they can't paint, they can't sculpt, they can't draw. And so in the 80s, before computers, it was like, then you can't be an artist. And it wasn't until I walked into my first art history class at Indiana University and just felt this calm on my heart, like, like I could almost exhale, you're home. This is where you're supposed to be. And so it took a while for me to understand that I was going to instead paint with words. And that's how I see it now. It's painting with words. And I love the job that I have, but no, it was not on my radar. And in fact, I started out in corporate America, that Fortune 100 company in the beginning, the wonderful introduction. I worked in healthcare. And it's so funny because I was in healthcare doing training classes and, new hire orientations on a stage and things like that. I always found a way to find the art jobs or the art projects in our departments. And so somehow I knew it was going to transition to what I do now. But no, I didn't start out there. I wish I would have. I would have started a lot earlier.
Oh yeah, I hear you there. I would have started out way earlier. I was actually in mortgages. I was a business analyst up till about 2.5 years ago. But I also have to say, like, Kristy has such an incredibly beautiful eye for art though still. So if you go to her Instagram page, her Instagram has like they always say, oh, make these stories, like, or make, not the stories, what do they call it? The grid, where it's all like color coordinated and everything. And I'm like, literally nobody does that except Kristy does. And she nails it. So if you want to see the most beautiful Instagram account and like all of Instagram, go check out Kristy's Instagram. Is it at Kristy Cambron?
Yeah. So
okay.
You can just go to Kristy Cambron. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, every picture that she does is stunning, and it all fits beautifully in this grid. My grid is like my cat, some books, like the weather outside. Like hers is stunning.
So kind. Yeah, I actually wanted to just do what they always say to do on social media, which is just be yourself. And so I thought, I'm going to take my love of books and stories and the people that I get to talk with in life and then art, and I'm just going to mash that together, and that's me. That's who I am. And so I was just trying to be myself, and people are really encouraging. And I do take all the photographs and edit all the photographs because it's fun. It's fun, and you're so kind. It's very artistic, and I really do enjoy it.
Oh yeah, you can tell. It is definitely done with love, and it's beautiful. So definitely check it out if you hadn't had a chance to. So Emily has another question, and it is what did you create how do you create the time to write during the day?
Wow, that is a brilliant question with 1,000 answers. I mean, I know you'll get this, Madeline. My husband and I have 3 sons, and we're starting to hit the middle school, high school years. And so now it is, I mean, I'm the nerd who took this book, Eric Larson, The Splendid and the Vile. See how thick that is? I took this to my son's basketball games. And when they would have a timeout, I would nudge my husband and say, all right, here I go. I'm diving back in. Tell me when it's over. And I would like read a couple of paragraphs for research to work on my next book. And I would do that. And so that's very much what it is. Sometimes with a couple of novels, it was setting my alarm clock for 4:30 in the morning, you know, and I would get up and I would do these writing sprints from 5 to 6 in the morning, every single day, rain or shine, feeling good or tired or not. And so sometimes it's just having that non-negotiable writing time that is on your calendar. And other times things happen and, you know, kids have sports or someone has a doctor's appointment or things. There have been so many times that I am writing, again, on my phone, probably, and like mobile technology, but I'm sitting in my car, or I'll have the laptop in the car and I'm typing out some chapters, or I'm always listening to an audiobook when I go somewhere. Either it's fiction and it's just a gift for my heart, or it's doing something that's for research. And I love also that the libraries connect in with different programs and Libro FM and things like that. So you have access to audiobooks through your library. And take advantage of that. I mean, I'm always doing that. So the writing day, I wish I could say that the writing day is, yay, I'm gonna have makeup on and my hair's gonna be done and I'm gonna sit here for 8 hours and work on this lovely book. It just doesn't work that way. Most of the time, especially if you're on deadline, it's sitting in front of that laptop, churning out words in the middle of the night, and your hair's in a messy bun and you are drinking coffee and eating Twizzlers to stay alive. Like that is very often what the writing day looks like. So I wish I could say it's all put together. It doesn't look like this.
I put my makeup on like 5 minutes before I had to log on.
We care about you all, so we
do this for you.
We do this for you.
I know I've had days where like it'll be like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm like, did I brush my teeth? I mean, that's not every day. That's like deadline. That's like survival mode. But yeah.
I have to go pick up my kids. And it's a scary thing. And I'm just pulling the hood up, friends. I'm pulling the hood up. I'm like, y'all don't know me. I was writing all day. Like that.
Absolutely. Catherine wants to know, how do you deal with rejection letters before your debut book was accepted?
Oh, that's a tough one. And they do come and it does happen. I also, in addition to being an author, I'm also a literary agent. So I have clients who I represent now in both fiction and nonfiction. And so trying to keep in the back of my mind what that felt like 10 years ago, you have to be so brave to send your work out, whether it's trying to find agent representation, trying to find your publishing home, or same thing as an author. You're putting a new novel out there and then it's like hiding from Goodreads for the next few months, right? Because you don't know, is that story going to connect with readers? Is that something that, as you said, Madeline, you pour your heart into these pages? Is it something that the readers love or connect with? Same thing when you're talking about, well, how do I weather rejection? And one of the things that I would do in going through that process is I just needed a thimbleful of courage to keep going. I mean, really, just a thimbleful of courage and encouragement to keep going. Lovingly in our family, we call those years the crash and burn years because I would submit my work, and while sometimes the rejections, they were good and they were valuable, and the publishing houses, the editors are fantastic, and they would say things like, oh, this is really good, you know, it's well written, but it just doesn't work for us right now. So it's like, don't give up, keep trying, know what's on your heart. If you are called to be a writer, then just keep after it and read. That is the best way to weather rejection, because sometimes through the reading, through that encouragement just to keep going, an idea will spark, and that could be the story. That's the story that is that interesting story that trends at the right time, that hits with the right agent, that hits with the right publisher, and boom, that's when you get your yes. So just remember, you don't have to boil the ocean on the first try. One thimbleful of courage just to keep going through each rejection, and know what's on your heart and keep after it.
Absolutely. And also rejection happens like to everyone. I think it was it J.K. Rowling had something, she had like dozens of I mean, now she has a whole spot in Universal Studios. Like my kids and I literally dress up like her characters and we buy like $50 wands so we can do all the little things. Yeah. And she got all these rejections. So definitely don't give up.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. And we have a question from Kelly, and she asked, what was the querying process like for you and how did you find your agent?
Great question. Well, I actually went to writers' conferences. And so again, this is kind of going back more than 10 years, but I found that for me, I wanted to have that face-to-face. It's difficult when you are querying agents and you are sending the emails out. Sometimes you could be better face-to-face, being passionate and talking about your story with that whole elevator pitch, if you've heard of that, giving that quick summary of what your story's about. Sometimes you're better one-on-one, face-to-face. And I thought, if I can invest in my career, I'm going to take this amount of money and this amount of time, and I'm going to go to a writer's conference, and I'm going to book that 10 to 15 minutes with an agent or 10 to 15 minutes with an editor. And I went to my first writing conference and I had 6 appointments and we had 6 requests for my work. And that was before the 2 years of rejections, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was so green, like I didn't know anyone, I didn't know anything. And there were all these amazing writers and, there were publicists and editors and publishers, everybody walking by me. And I had no idea who anyone was. And a month after that conference, we had 2 agents offer to represent, and we went with the agent with whom we thought would champion my work. Then that 2-year process of the rejection started. So most often it was get a rejection and okay, back to the drawing board, and I'm going to write something new. And I've heard that in the industry, or you hear things that by the time you get a yes for your first either agent contract or for publishing contract, that most of the time, at least in the fiction industry, there's an average 3 manuscripts that author has written before they finally get their yes. I had written 9 manuscripts. Some of them are on floppy disks. Raise your hand if you know what a floppy disk is. I know some of my original novels are lost in a drawer on a floppy disk. And my mom said that she will never sell out. She will never give those story secrets, because she was my first reader. She was the first one to read those. And I was like, Mom, those are so terrible. Don't let anyone ever see these stories. But yeah, so I went to writing contests. I entered writing contests rather, and went to conferences. So I really believe in investing well with reputable writing organizations, reputable contests, and going to conferences and learning from the people who do this every day. Because when you are signed with an agent and you are signed with a publisher, then you're going to find that you only have more people around you who are the experts, this is what they do for a living, and you're going to be inclined to listen to them. When you have an editor or you have retail or design, all these professionals who are around you, you're going to be working on book number 1 and they're working on book number 1001 or that type of thing. So you always want to keep in mind that if this is something that, again, is really on your heart and you're passionate about, then find those reputable organizations and really invest the time and the energy. You don't always have to have a lot of money to travel to a conference. There are so many online conferences and online organizations and book clubs and reading groups through your library. Take advantage of all of those opportunities. So I'm big on the face-to-face opportunities, but you can absolutely query an agent through email. People send me query emails every day. So.
Yeah, and conferences they're coming back now too. I actually just got back from a conference last week. And even on Twitter, they have like a query an agent. What is that tag, the hashtag?
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but they have all of those. All you do is just type in hashtag writing community and you will see a plethora of a ton of information anyways, but you'll probably find one of the opportunities to query an agent on Twitter as well. And I'll definitely make sure that your elevator pitch is on point because you only have so many characters.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet, but I may at some point. Yeah.
All right. Does anybody else have any more questions? And while I'm waiting to see if anybody's going to type anything, Kristy, why don't you give us some information how people can connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me at KristyCambron.com, Kristy. Cambron is CAMBRON.com. I am on social media, so you can find me on Goodreads or BookBub, or you can follow me on Amazon if you want updates about sales for my books. because I do have several fiction books that are out there. So you can find me there. And as Madeline stated, I will be real and say my favorite place online to hang out with other book lovers is on Bookstagram on Instagram. So if you connect with me there, again, that's really me out there, and I would love to chat with you about the books that we both love.
Perfect. And while you did that, we have one more question. So I'm going to read that really quick. So from Kristen, how do you describe your target reader, and how did you decide on who to write for?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, my target readers are those who love, again, those stories that intersect with art and history and faith. And so because I have been to art school and art history was what I went to school for, I always try to find a way to incorporate this juxtaposition between the light and the darkness, the beauty that's in the world that shines through some of the darkest points in human history. So a lot of the novels that I write do have to do with World War II or about the Holocaust or about war, about conflict, and then where are those pockets of light that show up out of that? So that's why, example, in the Italian ballerina, you have World War II, you have the Italian Holocaust, but it's right up next to just almost this beauty, beauty and non-beauty, beauty and war that come together. And so I try to think of my ideal reader as someone who not necessarily wants to be challenged or challenged in beliefs or things like that, but I want to present history, and then I want that reader to find beauty out of even those darkest places in history, because the hope would be in some of the darkest places in our own lives, we would be able to find beauty that comes out of that as well. The example of the first novel that I had, that dark time in my parents' and my family's life of losing my dad, there were some beautiful moments that we were able to find out of that. And so those are the readers that I connect with most. They love their history nerds. Just like you said, Madeline, like we're nerds, stick together. So go ahead and stick together. And one of the other things that I love is classic literature. So I love classic novels, and I'm in a book club with two other historical fiction authors. I mentioned them, Catherine Ray and Sarah Ladd. Our book club is online. It's called What the Dickens Book Club. We read a classic novel once a month, and we have giveaways, and then we have a live chat at the end of every month. And it's always us out there chatting with you about classic literature. So again, my ideal reader, you all just love good stories, and I am right there with you. You love books, you love good stories. That's where we meet.